Hello everyone. So welcome to the next session of Indian Modern History course, and today we are dealing with the 10th session, that is Lord Cornwallis. This is our second theme, that is administrative and the socio-economic policies. Last session we have discussed about Warren Hastings. Before starting the session, let us do some questions. In the context of the 19th century and the early 20th century, which of the statement best describes as the term great game? Before going to, it was a bit surprising for me. One student asked me that, sir, what is this night? He was confused. She was confused with the 19th century. So 19th century is basically the time between 1800 and 1899. This is known as the 19th century. And 20th century is known as the, I know it's very commonsensical, but still 1900 to the 1999. This is the 20th century. Then we are living in the 21st century. So sometimes it can be confusing, especially in your ancient and medieval history, art and culture, because a lot of centuries you have to discuss, a lot of centuries that you have to keep in mind. So usko yaad rakhna, keep that in mind. Now the question is, in the context of the 19th and 20th century, which of the following statement best describes the term the great game? Now you pause the video and try to answer this question. We have discussed it. What is the great game, right? Great game was used in the context of which war? That is the, you pause the video and try the answer, right? It was used in the context of the Afghan war, right? So the great game, we have discussed the Afghanistani story, that you have the British Empire here and the expanding Russian Empire there. You have the British Empire here, the crown jewel of the British Empire, and you have the expanding the Russian Empire, which has come near the Iran in 1827. And this is the Afghanistan. Within the context of the Afghanistan, we have seen this, the word great game. So the great game, also known as the Bolshaya Agra, was an intense rivalry between the British and the Russian Empire in the Central Asia, beginning in the 19th century and continuing through 1907, when there was a agreement between the Anglo and the Russians, British and the Russians. The British sought to influence and control much of the Central Asia to create the buffer of the crown jewel of this empire, that is British India. Then the things we have discussed, they kept on coming here, they did a lot of wars and all these things. It was the same context in which we have read this Sindh, Punjab and the Afghanistan story as well. Okay. Also, if you remember the Tibet experience, right? The young husband, Colonel Young husband, was sent to Tibet. It was also in the context of the Russians being sending their arms and ammunition to the area of the Tibet, and that also created a context of this great game. And finally, a convention was signed in 1907, which divided Persia into Russian control northern zone and some British control zone. You don't have to go into the world history side of it, but just remember that great game is what, in which context this term was used. So it refers to the intense rivalry between the British and the Russian empires to influence and control the Central Asia. Central Asia, imagine Central Asia mein us time the Afghanistan will also come, right? Because Central Asia is a subjective term. Now it has become more concretized in the present context. But remember, it's a context of the 18th and the 19th century we are talking about. Okay. Next question, let us do. With reference to the Treaty of Purandar in 1665, consider the following statement. It was signed between the Shayasta Khan of Deccan and the Maratha. According to this treaty, Shivaji has to accept the suzerainty of the Mughals. Try to answer this question. Pause this video and try to answer this question. If you are not able to answer such questions, then you need to revise more, the previous sessions. So instead of going very fast and completing all the lectures in one go, I'll suggest you that please go ahead and revise the previous sessions, because building up the foundation is more critical than completing it. Completing it properly is more important than completing it hastily and not doing it again. Because ultimately, then what you'll do, you'll start reading the book again if you don't revise it properly. So it will create a lot of problems for you. Okay. So this Treaty of Purandar, remember, first Afzal Khan came, who was sent by the ruler of Bijapur. Aurangzeb was watching. Aurangzeb has sent his uncle, that is Shayesta Khan, in the Deccan. His son was killed up by the Shivaji, and he was not the one who signed this treaty. After that, Aurangzeb has sent Raja Jai Singh of Amber. Right? He was a trusted advisor of the Aurangzeb to deal with the Shivaji. He did not underestimate Shivaji like the Shaista Khan. He underestimated Shivaji. So Jai Singh planned a siege. We have discussed the fort of Purandar, where Shivaji lodged his family and his treasure. Jai Singh besieged the Purandar and beating off all the Maratha attempts to revive it. And when Shivaji saw that there is no way out, he signed a treaty with the Jai Singh, and that treaty is known as the Treaty of Purandar. Very important treaty. So according to the Treaty of Purandar, Shivaji has to give away 23 out of his 35 forts. One of the fort was Kondahana, which was recovered at the first. You know, after all this Aurangzeb episode happened with the Shivaji. So remaining 12 fort Shivaji on the condition of service and loyalty to the Mughal throne. Then Shivaji helped the Mughal forces with the fight against the Bijapur as well. Remember, we have discussed that. So he personally joined in any. He promised to join personally in the Mughal campaign in Deccan, but there was no clause of accepting the Mughal suzerainty. What is this sovereignty versus suzerainty? Sovereignty is basically that I am the king, I am the independent. So suzerainty means that I will do the things in my autonomy, but ultimately I'll bow down my head to Aurangzeb. So this is called the suzerainty. Suzerainty means that just like we have discussed, that Tibet was under the suzerainty of the China. So it was the China which is the sovereign. Tibbets are not sovereign. Yes, they have their autonomy to do the things in within their domain, but they are not sovereign in that sense. Sovereign is China. They have to ascribe the sovereignty to the China. So this is the difference between the term suzerainty and the sovereignty. So the answer is Treaty of Purandar. Both the statement, the question they have asked is not correct. इसको भी ध्यान रखना है in your paper. But UPSC does not place such terms, 1 to 2 question, not more than that. But within the test series, you need to keep in mind, not correct, what is the instructions being given. So keep in mind of it. So both the statements are not correct. And sometimes it hurts the most if you know the question that is right and you mark it wrong. Then there is no, that is a sin. Next question is, which of the following statement is not correct regarding the Maharaja Ranjit Singh and his administration in the Punjab? First, his religious policy was conservative in nature. His army was not confined to Sikh but also included persons from the other parts of the country. He set up modern foundries to manufacture cannon at the Lahore. He continued the system of the land revenue promulgated earlier by the Mughals. With respect to Ranjit Singh, which of the following statements is not correct? Now, few of the statements obviously we have not read. That is why we are having this series, that is learn through question, right? So let us learn something about Ranjit Singh more. Few of the things that we know out of it, that obviously he was not confined to the Sikh. We have discussed that he had the service of Dogras, and even the Muslims were there in his. He based his appointment based upon the merit, and that's why you have a lot of stakeholders in his army also, right? And his policies obviously were not conservative. Otherwise, he would not have been able to create such a huge empire within that territory, which is very religiously diverse. For example, you go to Jammu and Kashmir, you find Hindus. You go to this place, earlier Jammu and Kashmir, not present day. Earlier, you'll find Hindus. You go this side, in the Pakistani side, you will find the Muslims being there. So he cannot be religious conservatives. Okay. So the old Sikh chiefs were transformed into big zamindar, those who were the, we have discussed that, right? The other Sardar chiefs. He did not make any changes in the system of the land revenue promulgated by the Mughal. So because he did not have a lot of time, that is why. And that's why initially the British also tried the Mughal method, because they did not have a lot of experience and did not have a lot of time. But as they spent more and more time, they devised their own land revenue methods. He developed a powerful, disciplined, and a well-equipped army. Gorkhas, Bihari, Udiya, Pathan, Dogra, Punjabi, Muslim, these people. He set up a modern foundry to manufacture the cannon at Lahore. So at Lahore, he set up his modern foundry and employ Muslim gunners to man them. Then he has the capacity for choosing his ministers and his officials. He was having a lot of outstanding men, and he was very tolerant and liberal in the religious matter. So this is all being. So first statement is the wrong statement, then all the statements are the right statement, that he was not conservative, he was very tolerant. Based upon the idea of merit, he has given a lot of powers and all these things. So, now we start the session for Lord Cornwallis. Now, in the last session, we talked about, in the ninth session, we talked about the Warren Hastings, right? And we talked about the times in which he has arrived in. The times were very turbulent for East India Company. East India Company has asked for the £1 million of the loan from the parliament, and that was very shocking for the parliament. Hence, Warren Hastings, a regulating act has been passed, and under which the Warren Hastings became the first Governor General, first Governor General of the Bengal. This was the Warren Hastings journey. Then Warren Hastings is starting. Then Warren Hastings has undertaken a lot of reforms. We have divided into four heads, that is administrative and the revenue reform. Sorry, administrative and the judicial reform. Then revenue and the commercial reform. Then some external relations, whatever he has done. And then we talked about his social reforms as well. So these are the four heads where we talked about the Warren Hastings, 4 and 6 head, whatever you want to decide. But we also read that the problems he was facing with the presidency, for example, Bombay presidency, sometimes overruling this Calcutta presidency or creating some hurdles for the Calcutta presidency. And secondly, we have seen that how Warren Hastings are facing a lot of challenge within his own council because he did not have any veto power. So within his council, the people were there. They were very ambitious. They wanted to become the Governor General themselves. They wanted to derail Warren Hastings. They thought that Warren Hastings is very corrupt. And that's why we have seen a lot of problems being cropped up to the Warren Hastings when it comes to the following of his policies. A lot of cases was also levied against the Warren Hastings. For example, Nand Kumar case. For example, Raja Chat Singh of Banaras. For example, Begum of Awadh. So a lot of cases. For example, the treatment in the Rohilla Khand. So he was tried for all these cases in England in from 1787, and finally he was taken out of the charges and he lived till 1880. So this is the journey of the Warren Hastings. When Warren Hastings has finished his career in India, when he resigned in 1785, they have to appoint the next one. That is a very important guy. That is Lord Cornwallis. Now, Lord Cornwallis already had an experience. He was also there in the times of the America when the American War of Independence happened. Right? He was the one who surrendered in the Yorktown. He was the person, but he enjoyed a lot of confidence of the people of the British Parliament, and then that is why he was sent to the next work, that is in India. That was Lord Cornwallis. So Lord Cornwallis' reign, that you have to remember, from 1786 to 1793, and few of the things that we have to discuss. First, some introduction. Then we talk about Tipu and the Third Mysore War. We have already discussed it, so passing reference we will give. More importantly, the reforms of the Lord Cornwallis are very, very important. And finally, we will see how he has got. After Lord Cornwallis comes the Mr. John Shore, who was recommended by the Lord Cornwallis. Lord Cornwallis has recommended the name of his successor, that he was the person who should be appointed as the next Governor General of Bengal, and he was appointed later on. He stayed in power for 5 years and then he left, and then became the Lord Wellesley. That is Richard Wellesley. Very, very important personality. Okay? Chalo. So today we'll also read about John Shore. Nothing important happened in this time, but few of the things that we'll read. And then we'll move on in the next session on the Lord Wellesley. Let's start the discussion on the Lord Cornwallis. So Cornwallis, after Warren Hastings, he came and he was a warrior and a statesman. He can fight also, and he was a very good empire builder, administrator. He belonged to influential and aristocratic family within the Britishers. Before that, if you see Robert Clive, he did not belong to any aristocratic family. From this time onwards, you can see that these aristocratic families, people are getting appointed to these high places. So that is a trend that we'll see moving forward. Okay? He has a lot of political connection. That is why even if he has surrendered in the Yorktown to the Britishers, to the 13 colonies, to the Americans, that is why he found favor in the parliament, and he was given the very important assignment to defend the crown jewel of the British Empire, that is India. So in 1781, he surrendered in the Yorktown, but his reputation was spoiled. But still, because of his political connection, he had the confidence of his fellow parliamentarians to help him out. Okay? Fellow countrymen. So Parliament was prepared to give him extraordinary legal power, which we have discussed in the Pitt's India Act. The Pitt's India Act has given the veto power to the Governor General. Before that, 1781 Amendment Act has given the Governor General precedence over the Supreme Court as well. So now Cornwallis goes to India with a lot of authority, a lot of legal power, which was not there with the Baron Hastings, right? So amendment to the Pitt's India Act enable him to overrule the decision of the majority of the council. New tradition of the choosing person from the aristocratic family started. So these are the things that we need to remember with respect to the Lord Cornwallis, which with respect to his introduction. Chalo, the context we know, context in which he has arrived, the context we know, it was the Warren Hastings has to resign, and the company situation was better relative to the times of the Warren Hastings has come. But there was dissension. Land revenue system, we'll see, land revenue system was not properly done, right? So first we'll come to the context with respect to each and every reform. Let's talk about the Anglo-Mysore War. So if you remember that the first Anglo-Mysore War happened in the times of the Robert Clive. Then second Anglo-Mysore War happened in the times of the Warren Hastings. Third Anglo-Mysore War happened in the times of the Lord Cornwallis. It was the Lord Cornwallis who created this triple alliance, and he wanted to stem this Tipu Sultan out of the. He was a very thorn in the British Empire, and the Tipu Sultan has to be taken out. And the responsibility fell on the Lord Cornwallis that we have to put Tipu Sultan out. And then he signed the Treaty of Seringamapatnam, and through which the Tipu Sultan was almost done. And finally, with the fourth Anglo-Mysore War, Lord Wellesley finished Tipu Sultan altogether. So in the times of the Lord Cornwallis, what happened? The third Anglo-Mysore War, and that has given the most important blow to the Tipu Sultan. The context of the Tipu Sultan was obviously the Treaty of Mangalore, because it it was almost a draw, but it has shown some of the weakness of the English, because they could not complete the task, and also it shows the military strength of the Mysore, because they are able to withstand the Britishers. Though it was a draw, but still the Mysore's military strength was there. You can imagine, because the Tipu Sultan has fought against the Nizam and the Marathas. Remember, Marathas have already signed the Treaty of Salbai. थोड़ा सा relate करके we have to understand. They have already signed the Treaty of Salbai with the Britishers, and helping the Britishers in the Second Mysore War. So now the Tipu was vengeful that we have to take the vengeance against this Nizam and Maratha, and the context was provided by the difference with the Travancore kingdom. Both EIC and the Tipu Sultan War, both finding for the reasons to conflict or to come into conflict with each other, and the context was provided by the difference between the Raja of the Travancore. We have discussed all of these things. That's why I'm going very quickly. In between, the Tipu also became strong. He was sending some envoys to Turkey and to the French, and Cornwallis thus formed an anti-Tipu alliance. And finally, when Tipu lost, they have to sign a treaty of Seringamapatnam. That was almost the end of the Tipu Sultan. So that was one of the crowning achievements of the Lord Cornwallis. That is almost the de facto defeat of your Tipu Sultan, and that story we have already discussed. The major focus for us today is that Cornwallis and its reforms. Now, some of the reforms also we'll look at it in a different direction. For example, let me tell you right here. For example, when we look at some of the sessions later on, we will talk about the civil services, let's say. We will talk about the police reforms. We'll talk about we'll talk about the police reforms. We'll talk about the judicial reforms. We'll talk about some reforms. Now remember, we are dealing with the Governor General wise. For example, Warren Hastings did what? He did something here, he did something here. Then Lord Cornwallis did something here, something here, something here. Then William Bentinck will come, he'll do something here, something here, something here. So we are reading them abhi Governor General wise. Try to understand what I'm trying to say. We are reading here in the Governor General voice that this is the time this is being done. Later on, we'll read this voice, that what is the total chronology of civil services, total chronology of police, and total chronology of the judicial. This will give you two-way perspectives. First perspective is through Governor Generals, and second perspective through judicial. In my opinion, what you need to keep in mind, that second one, that is this is a very important one, because you can expect question in your UPSC on this regard. both in pre and your mains. Huh? The question can be asked with respect to Cornwallis, but that will become a small part of it. But you need to remember them chronologically, what happened from civil services, this. And that we will be able to see finally when your complete history is done, right? When your complete things are done, then we will be able to look at when your complete political history till partition we will reach, then we'll look at it again. So that will also help you in the kind of a revision, in the sense of the revision as well. Okay, so keep that in mind. If some things are being left out here, so keep in mind that will be covered later on. Okay, let's continue. So if we talk about the Cornwallis and his reforms, we can talk about the administrative reforms, the judicial reforms, the police reforms, some revenue reforms, and some other reforms, commercial reform, for example. So these are the reforms of the Lord Cornwallis. Starting with the first one, that is the administrative reforms. Now, one of the challenge with respect to Cornwallis, we have seen that your 1793 Regulating Act and then your Pitts India Act both talked about that the company's official needs to be given more money, because the one of the problem that IIC faced a lot of corruption being done with the private trade. These officials were very corrupt. And why? Because there was a lot of posts, a lot of money being spent on them. Salaries were less, but uh, incentives are very much. Okay? For example, if you do this much trade, we'll give you this much money. No, Cornwallis said this should not be there. We need to pay them proper salary. If we pay them very small salary, they will be involved in these petty things. We should not let them do so. We should not involve themselves in, we should not let them involved in the private trade. So he worked for the purification of the service and the employment of capable and the honest public servants. He aimed at economy, simplification, and the purity. Okay? Then he found that the company, one second, he found that the servants of the company were underpaid and they received very high commissions on the revenue. So the commissions are a big problem because they are gaining at a personal level without helping the company out. This aimed at cleansing the system. He aimed at cleansing the system, abolishing the vicious cycle of paying the small salaries, allowing the enormous perks. He abolished the surplus posts, the posts which were not required. He reduced, for example, we'll see he reduced the collectorship as well. He inaugurated the policy of making appointments solely based upon the merit. So the idea of merit first time came into the civil services in the times of the Cornwallis. He introduced the separation of the three branches of power. We'll see the separation of power he followed. That became very important component of his Cornwallis Code as well. Separation of power has been the philosophy of which philosopher? That is the Montesquieu. He talked about that. Separation of the power needs to be there. If there's a power given to one person or one entity, too much power concentration, the power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The collector, the kingpin for the administration system, was deprived of the judicial powers. Now the collectors, which we have already discussed in the time for the Warren Hastings, the collector which were also involved in the civil and the criminal jurisdiction were deprived of these powers. Some power was remaining with the criminal, but civil powers were deprived of. And he will say your only work is to collect the revenue, that's it. And some criminal, very small criminal powers have been given to them, criminal jurisdiction. So that is what separation of power is all about. That was established by the Lord Cornwallis. But these are the good things that we can see with the Cornwallis. But overall, it was a racial profiling thing as well. For example, within the civil services, the Indians were not allowed. Very important civil services were headed by the Europeans. So it was a Europeanization of the civil services. Indians were not allowed. Indians were not considered as a, for example, as meritorious enough. So merit was not related to Indians. So it was some sort of a discrimination with the Indians, right? No promotions to the Indians in the army as well. So you can see the higher posts were filled by the Europeans. You can see top four filled by the Europeans. And it is a kind of a racial profiling. When you say that the merits cannot be found into the Indian people, merit can only be found with the European ones. That itself is a kind of a discrimination, the racial discrimination being carried out by the Cornwallis. So good things are to hai, but these are the negative things with respect to Lord Cornwallis, that he basically paved the way for the racial profiling of the civil servants. Sense of elitism which has crept into civil servants, which is the problem being faced in the post-independence era as well. Next, we talk about the judicial reforms. So in the judicial reforms were based upon the idea of the Warren Hastings. Whatever Warren Hastings has done, some changes were being made. For example, as you see, select collector was responsible for both of these. Now these powers have been taken away from him. Diwani Adalat. For Diwani Adalat, they will set up another district judge. He will be a separate figure. And hence there is a separation of power here. He abolished this Fauzdari Adalat. Cornwallis also created some lower courts, subordinate courts below these district level bodies. He set up one intermediate courts as well. You will see. So these all the things were done by the Lord Cornwallis, and he set up a hierarchy of the judicial system. That hierarchy you can see now also. Not in this sense, but still there is a hierarchy which can be witnessed in the present time as well. For example, let us talk about the civilian administration, civilian justice. Okay? Now, Diwani Adalats were there and they were presided by the district judge, not collectors. Remember that. So, this is a kind of a separation of power. Yes, you can collect the revenue, but you will not be in charge of the cases which is related to it. It is at the district level. At the below district level, they have the registrar court headed by the European and some subordinate courts headed by the Indian judges, that is Munsif and the Amins. So, it was a below district level. Then you have the provincial court of appeal before the Sadar Diwani Adalat. So in intermediate stage has also been given. Okay? These are the reforms in the civilian side of the jurisdiction. Diwani Adalat presided by the district judge who was not the collector. Then provincial court of appeal, then Sadar Diwani Adalat, which was there in the times of the Warren Hastings as well. You can see Sadar Diwani Adalat. So you can read about here. Everything is written like that. He laid the foundation of the new system, dispensing justice through a hierarchy of the civil and the criminal court. Though the given the start by the Warren Hastings, it was stabilized by the Cornwallis. East District Diwani Adalat, uske baad the district judge that was there. He separated the post of the civil judge and the collector, and then appeal from the district go to the provincial court of appeal, then Sadar Diwani Adalat. With respect to the criminal side of it, with respect to the criminal jurisdiction, Fauzdari Adalats were abolished, they which were established by the Warren Hastings. He established the circuit courts. So the circuit courts used to go from places to places. So they visit one district twice a year. So they toured the district. So 4 circuit courts were established. And from circuit courts, the appeal goes to the Sadar Nizamat Adalat. Some powers have been given to the collector of the trying the criminal cases. Some small powers have been given to the collector as well. The criminal cases were basically taken up by these circuit courts. Who was the head of the Sadar Nizamat Adalat? There also the restructuring has come. Now, the Sadar Nizamat Adalat will be held by the Governor General and the member of the Supreme Court, and with the help of the Chief Qazis and the Muftis. So, yaad kaise karna hai? All these things are a bit tricky. Thoda, what is the change from Warren Hastings to this period? And we'll do it through questions also. For prelims, we just need to remember that, for example, Lord Cornwallis has abolished the Fauzdari Adalat. He has taken the power away from the collectors in the Diwani cases. So these are the few key facts that you need to remember, and that will be reflected in your prelims answers, prelims options. This will only be asked because the system itself is very difficult to understand. What tricky hai understand karna, and it keeps on changing. For example, when we read William Bentinck, some changes will also come. Hence, we need to remember it like it. And finally, when we'll read the judicial reforms altogether, we'll be able to get a better picture of it. Okay? Chalo. So these are your judicial reforms. Now, William Bentinck will come later on. He will abolish these provincial court of appeal. We'll see that. He will again go for the centralization of the power in the hands of the collector, William Bentinck. That we will see later on. Now, in the criminal cases, Muslim law was improved and followed. So, some improvement was there. In the civil cases, the law, as we have discussed, with respect to the religion. If, for example, if there is suit between Hindu and a Muslim, who will decide? The judge will decide, the authority. He was merciful. By temperament, he hated the barbarous punishments and abolished like mutilation or trial by ordeal. Okay? So, mutilation and these barbarous punishments were taken out of the judicial system. He is also known as the lawgiver. Some people also say that he was more of a lawgiver rather than an administrator. So he, with the help of the George Borlow, Cornwallis has set up one comprehensive code covering the whole fields of the administration: administrative, judicial, police, commercial, and fiscal. This code, the Cornwallis Code, it is said he laid the foundation of rule of law in India. Because you need to have uniform law, we have discussed last time also. You have to have uniform laws which have consistencies, which can be followed without discrimination, which does not lead to a lot of suits, which leads to a lot of, for example, people, those who are adjudicating authority needs to understand it, and more importantly, the people on which these laws are working, they need to understand it. Now that's a very far-fetched case. Now the people are also understanding the laws. Even in India, common times, people do not understand the common law. Let's not talk about it. But still, this comprehensive code is being created to help the adjudicating authorities to create a system of consistencies, a system of uniformities, so as to present a picture of the rule of law, so as to better the system, so as to reduce this corruption, nepotism that is there in the judiciary. Okay? So the code was based upon the principle of the Montesquieu, that is separation of power. In order to curb the excessive authority of the authority, Cornwallis made all the official responsible to the courts. We will see. For example, he will make the police authority accountable to the courts as well. Okay? So you can see next is the police reform. So we are done with the administrative reform. We have seen the judicial reforms. Then we'll come to the revenue, or sorry, police reform. Now, if you want to make a good judicial reform, if you want to make a good judiciary, you need to improve the police as well. And that is why even in the present context, when you talk about the judicial accountability and judicial pending of the cases, very important component in answer is also, should also be that police reform needs to take place. Because if these police reforms will not take place, the proper judicial reforms will not happen. So proper judicial reforms needs to happen before your police reforms needs to take place. Okay? Now he has taken up the reform of the police. So for example, every district was divided into district was headed by an SP, superintendent of police, and the districts were divided into different areas. Those were known as thanas. Abhi jaise system hai na? Districts were divided into different thanas, and every thanas was headed by a daroga. One daroga will be there in every thana, like it. Now every authority is done by the SP, and SP is accountable to the district judge, because every authority needs to be accountable to the court. This is the whole idea of your police reforms. Okay? So the effective implementation of the judicial reform is possible only with the reorganization of the police administration. District judge control the police. Each district is divided into the thanas of area around 20 miles. The place under the daroga, assisted by many constables. One of the observer has noted that daroga enjoyed almost unlimited power of extortion and became the scourge of the country. That is the problem of the police at that time also, because in this area you can see that who is the major authority in this area. That particular daroga is only the authority, and then he becomes obviously powerful, and the power goes to his head also. So daroga enjoyed almost unlimited power of extortion and became the scourge of the country. Then we talked about the revenue reforms. At the time of the War and Hastings, we have seen that the system of the Mughals have collapsed. The systems given by the Mughals have collapsed, and what has happened? The system given by the War and Hastings was based upon the trial and error. A lot of experimentation have done. For example, he has started this 5-year system, then after he switched to annual system, these things. So Cornwallis played a very important role first to make a very substantial changes into the land revenue system. He decided that we need to fix the system very well, because ultimately the idea of the British was to extract as much revenue as land revenue as possible. As much land revenue as possible, if we can extract, then only we can rule very significantly. And this was the task of your Lord Cornwallis. Hence he decided that some of the things that he has done, he has divided the whole Bengal into some fiscal areas, just like thanas that we have seen. One fiscal area placed under one collectorship. He reduced the number of collectors as well, because so as to strengthen the system, reduce the surplus postage. We have discussed that. The committee of revenue which was there, it was again revamped, and the board of revenue was set up, and who will do the superintendence of these collectors. In 1790, he decided this 10-year settlement period with the zamindars, and they are given the ownership of the land based upon the highest of highest bidding. And then this permanent settlement system, finally, this 10-year settlement became permanent and perpetual. And finally, this became the basis of your permanent settlement. There's a debate between two officials, that is Mr. John Shore and Mr. James Grant. James Grant did not believe that we should give this permanent settlement. We should not go for this permanent and perpetual system. But John Shore was in the favor of this permanent settlement. And ultimately, Cornwallis went to the judgment of the John Shore. He went to the judgment of the John Shore. And ultimately, the permanent settlement was decided. Now, what is permanent settlement? What is done? What are the positives of it? What are the negatives of it? We'll read it all together in a complete segment of the land revenue. Don't worry about it. Very important topic, permanent settlement, because that is a part of your modern history, part of land reforms, and also the part of your GS3 topic, that is land reforms. Now, that land reform also traces its history from your modern history. And that is why we'll discuss these land reforms later on. Don't worry about it. Okay? Chalo. So Lord Cornwallis, other reforms which we see, these are the commercial reforms you can see. So commercial reforms. So there was a board of trade being set up in the times of the Warren Hastings, 1774. Just one second. 1774. Let me. So board of trade was set up in 1774 by Warren Hastings. Now that was again restructured and to manage the commercial investments of the country, of the company. So these are the other reforms. These are the commercial reforms. With the help of the Charles Grant, he eradicated numerous abuses and the corrupt practices of the Britishers. Fair treatment was given to the weavers and the Indian worker, which we have already seen in the times of the Warren Hastings as well. He increased the remuneration of the honest service. So these are the other reforms committed by the Lord Cornwallis. Overall, if you talk about the estimate of the Lord Cornwallis, so there are a few terms which is again, estimate is very well presented in Tamil Nadu board books. Okay? So he was a blue-blooded aristocrat, an ardent patriot. He discharged his duty fearlessly, and the life was an embodiment of duty and sacrifice. He perceived the threat of the Tipu Sultan and curtailed it totally, discarding the policy of the non-intervention. Then, as an administrator, he consolidated company's position in India and started the tradition of efficient and the pure administration. Although defects were there in the permanent settlement, which we'll look at it later, his achievements were the administrative and the judicial reforms. These were good. He may be regarded as the parent of the Indian administrative service and the founder of an efficient and the clean system of the administration. At least he has taken some of the steps in doing so. Obviously, the negative side of the things we have already read, the racial profiling and all these things. But these are the estimate you can write about the Lord Cornwallis. But remember, always end your answers whenever you're talking about these civil servants, these governor generals, in a negative sense. Though they have done the good thing, but overarching, under which overarching umbrella they are working in? They are working in the overarching umbrella of the colonialism, which is inherently unethical. So you are doing something good under the pretext of everything that is bad. So obviously that's wrong. So that should not be like that. Chalo. So after Cornwallis has done, Mr. John Shore has helped Cornwallis with the permanent settlement. Right? And that is why Lord Cornwallis has given the recommendation that John Shore ko please make the Governor General after I am gone. So John Shore, a distinguished member of the company civil services, the author of the revenue settlement of 1793, succeeded to the government on the departure of the Lord Cornwallis, who made him that he should be my choice. The period of the John Shore was the Governor General was uneventful. Nothing a lot happened, and that is why you don't read about him as well. About Mr. John Shore. He played an important role during the introduction of the permanent settlement, that is the Zamindari system in 1793. Obviously, he was the author of it when it was established. Cornwallis has given go ahead of it, but it was him under whom Governor Generalship it was done. The John Shore. Okay? One more important thing happened in his time, that is the Charter Act of 1793. Again, it is not a very happening charter, as in a lot of things it did not happen in this charter, but we need to know it. We'll discuss it. So we'll see this. The Battle of Kharada happened in which Nizam and the Maratha confederacy fought. Nizam was badly defeated. He followed the policy of non-intervention, and for which he is known for. That is, John Shore followed the policy of non-intervention. And obviously, when you are a very important power in the region, when you are such an important power in the region, and you are not intervening if any cases happen, then obviously your prestige will be down. You trust the, for example, let's say Carnatic time, if the Britishers and the French would not have intervened, then obviously they will not emerge as a very important player into the mix. But they have intervened, and thus they have become a very, very important player into that mix. And when you will follow the policy of non-intervention, what will happen? This will happen. So these are the problems which were created. So Mr. John Shore followed the policy of non-intervention despite the Nizam as under his protection. So this led to the loss of trust with the Britishers. Then we'll talk about the Charter Act of 1793. Now, if we look at it, the Charter Act of 1793, there are a few things we need to keep in mind. Now, we started reading these acts from 1773, that is Regulating Act, right? Now, the charter to the East India Company to maintain their monopoly into the India. Now, remember, EIC is a private trading or company which has been given the permission, not a very good map of Britain. So, which has been given the permission by the by the Britain Parliament, or by the de facto or the de jure authority, the monarchy, to go ahead and trade in the India. Now, this, remember, this is a private trading organization. This is a private company which is there, EIC. And obviously, slowly and slowly, the other companies also will be formed, and they'll ask for the more territory, more that this India should be open to them as well. The other companies, company 2, company 3, like that. Okay? And that is why now the control is there on the company. So Regulating Act has said that 20 years, your charter has to be renewed every time. In between, 1784 Pitt's India Act has come. And then obviously in 1793, Charter Act has come. Now the charter is being renewed after 20 years. And that is why you will see the series of Charter Acts. For example, 1793, 1813, then 1833, 1853. The charter will be renewed after 20 years, 20 years. And now these Charter Acts have started to come after the Regulating Act. Now these Charter Acts will come. Now the Charter Act of 1793 was not a very eventful charter. So, for example, they have renewed the company's privileges for next 20 years. Okay, next 20 years, you can have the monopoly. Company ko bola, EIC ko. Okay, fine. The company, after paying all the necessary expenses, interest, dividend, salary, was to pay 5 lakh pound annually to the British government. So 0.5 million pounds have to be paid to the British government as well, because we are giving you this monopoly, and that is why you have to pay us like this. The royal approval was mandated for the appointment of the Governor General and the governors and the commander in chiefs. Governor General of Bengal, governors of the Bengal Presidency, the Bombay Presidency and the Madras Presidency, and the commander in chief, who will be the member of your council. That was mandated by the Pitt's India Act. Remember? So under the Pitt's India Act, 3 people will be there plus 1. So that among the 3, 1 will be commander in chief. The senior officials of the company was debarred from leaving the India without permission. Doing so will be treated as a resignation. So if the senior members of the company are, if they go out of the India, they will be treated as a resignation by them. Then the company empowered to give license to the individual as well as the company's employees to trade in India. The licenses, known as the privileges, paved the way for shipment of the opium to the China. Now this led to the Opium War, which is a part of your world history. World history, whenever you read Chinese story, you will read about the Opium Wars. Revenue administration was separated from the judiciary functions, and the home government were to pay off the Indian revenue, which continued up to 1999. Now this is a very important point that you need to recall. Home government members were to be paid out of the Indian revenue. For example, those who are working for the British administration in India, those who are living in England or London, but working for, let's say, Indian affairs, unki salary kahan se aayegi? From India, their salary will come. Now later on, Indian nationalists, when they will come, we will see, they will heavily criticize this. They will call it as a drain of wealth. that the wealth from India is drained, and this goes in the form of the salaries, allowances of these people, those who are not living in India. They're living outside India, they are doing anything else, but just because they're associated with India, their money is paid from our exchequer. This is not good. That is fine if the people is living in India, they're administrating in India. Lord Cornwallis, if gets salary from India, then that's fine. But what about these people? These people should not get any salary from us. So this is your Charter Act of 1793. There is one more thing, as I have discussed with you with respect to this police reforms, judicial reforms, and civil services reform. Similarly, you need to prepare these acts. I have highlighted last time: Regulating Act, Fits India Act, your Charter Act. इनकी एक अलग से make notes of it. Whether you want to make e-notes, whether you want to make handwritten notes, do anything, but make a separate 2 to 3 page notes of these acts. And this should be made before the end of your, let's say your classes end your February mid, or let's say January end. So that thing should be made just after your classes are over. Those notes should be prepared, chapter this act wise. Very, very important. I will provide you the PDF as well, but this is very important because that will hurt you in your test series. It will be, the questions will be asked in the test series, this question will be asked in your UPSC as well. Very, very important. And it's very tricky also to remember because such so many facts, so many changes are there in these particular acts. अभी तक तो कोई changes नहीं देखेंगे. When we'll move on from 1813, 1833, 1853, 1858, then it will create a lot of challenge for you to manage. Okay? So with this, we finish our session for today, and that's all. So we have seen the times of the Lord Cornwallis, what are the changes that he has brought. More importantly, the changes he has brought to the civil services, the judicial reforms, the police reforms, and the revenue reforms. Within the revenue reforms, permanent settlement we'll read again when we'll talk about the land revenue system. For example, there we'll talk about the permanent settlement, Royatwari, Mahalwari, the positives and the negatives of it. Okay? There we'll discuss the rest of the things. So see you all in the next session. Next session will be based upon the times of the Lord Wellesley, because we have discussed Lord Cornwallis and John Shore. After John Shore, very important person will come, that is Lord Wellesley, whose reign is very, very important for us. Okay? So with this, let's finish the question and see you all in the next class. Thank you. Bye-bye.